right, so many of you people here know who G. Edward Griffin is, of course, author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. Basically, the Bible on the Federal Reserve has done incredible work for more than 50 years now, and I say that because it's amazing. He has the knowledge of someone his age, but has the stamina of someone in his 30s. You know, it's been really inspirational to watch G. Edward Griffin over the years. He helped influence me many years ago about the Federal Reserve after Dr. Ron Paul in his book And the Fed recommended reading The Creature from Jekyll Island, and I read it, and it was just a phenomenal book. It's still cited so much to this day, and it's been in so many printings as well. And it's just a good tribute to how important this book was on society when it comes to educating people about the Federal Reserve. So without further ado, I introduce Mr. G. Edward Griffin.
Thank you. So, yeah, we don't want to make this, like a college course or anything like that. It really doesn't deserve that, because although the Federal Reserve seems like a very mysterious thing, and all of the central banks of the world are essentially the same kind of creature, and it all seems kind of mysterious to the average person. Oh, this is all about money and banking, and I don't understand that. What is the discount rate, and what does really discount mean in terms of banking, and isn't it a good thing that we have the government running it? And all of these questions come to mind, and people have the general idea that the central banks of their countries, whether it's Canada or the U.S., France, Germany, I don't care, all pretty much the same. They have a feeling that these are government agencies, and in some cases they are pretty close to it. They're closer to it in some countries than they are in the United States. But in all cases, that's an incorrect analysis or definition to call them a government agency. Because what you really find when you drill down to the way these things are created, who controls them, who makes the decisions, and so forth, you find that they are a cartel. It was a very shocking thing for me to realize early on in this that Federal Reserve was a cartel. It was no different than an oil cartel, a banana cartel, peanut cartel. It just happened to be a banking cartel. And like all cartels, the purpose of having them in the first place is not to serve the people. It's not to give the best break possible for the consumer or for the citizen. All cartels, without exception, have only one primary purpose: to exist. And that's to promote the best interest of the members of the cartel, period. This is a very hard thing for people to get their brains wrapped around, because from the very first age, when you have the intelligence to understand a little bit about money and banking and all of that, we're all taught. Most of us have come through government schools, and those that came through private schools, the curricula often is determined by governments. But anyway, all of us have come through this so-called educational process, come out the other end with this crazy idea that somehow money is created for the best of society, for the betterment of the people, and that it's done by very dedicated, selfless public servants who just work all day and night, and they're thinking all day and night of how I can best serve the people of my country, how I can give them the best shake, how I can preserve the purchasing power of their money, how I can make it so that the economy is thriving, and how we can avoid inflation, all for the people. We get the impression that that's what it's all about. Well, that's what I felt when I started into the research cycle way back in, well, I guess I started on this path in about 1960 or 1961, a long time ago. And that was my opinion. And every time I came into a piece of information that contradicted that, I had the tendency to reject it. Well, this is probably biased information, because they certainly wouldn't allow that to happen, would they? And there again, you see the underlying assumption was the they who allow things to happen. Sometimes we call them the powers that be. We just assume that since we live in representative governments. Sometimes we call it a democracy. Lord help us if we ever really get a pure democracy, because, well, we come back to that later. Democracies are mob rule, basically. No limitation on the will of the majority. Winner takes all. As long as you can say it's in the name of the people, you can do anything you want. And so anyway, we're not taught that in school either, by the way, but we come up with the idea that we live in a system of representative government. And we're not quite sure what that means, except that we have representatives. And we elect these representatives. And therefore, since we voted for them, they have to be good guys. Because we wouldn't vote for bad guys. We only vote for good guys. And so since we voted, or many of us voted in the election, and our man won the election, he's a good guy because we made him a good guy when we voted for him. And we're not interested in hearing any information that would indicate that we made a big mistake. So people tend to defend their bad judgments, and they defend the candidates they vote for, regardless of how the evidence shows that they're really criminals who have found a good way to practice their criminality and be well respected for it instead of going to prison. They're criminals who have decided who gets to be classified as criminals. They're criminals who run the police force. They're criminals who run the court system, and that's not a bad deal. The idea that criminals might run the monetary system, however, never crosses the minds of most people, because they think, and I thought, that the monetary system was in fact indirectly determined by me as a voter, because I voted for these heroes who made the laws that contoured the legal system, that issues the money and so forth. And so since I was part of that, this whole system has to be good. Now, I've taken longer than I should have to dwell on that, but it's a theme that comes to my mind very often lately, because I'm going to make a little side journey here for a second, especially in today's news cycle. There's a lot of demonstration and violence going on. People are trashing the streets. They're trashing their country. They're saying the system is broken, and this is bad and that's bad. Look, the government's doing this wrong. Government's doing that wrong. And this system, which is controlled by the government, is not good. And so what do they want? They want more government. These people that are complaining about the bad, broken system that the government has created, that the government now regulates, that the government now controls, it's broken. And they are saying, let's fix it by having more government. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. This concept of, if it's government, it's got to be good. People have to wake up that if it's government, it's probably not good, because the very definition of the word government, what does that mean? The purpose of government is what? To govern. Does anybody want to be governed that I know of? I've not met one person yet that wanted to be governed, and yet they want a government. These words, they don't think of what they mean. They should be saying, I want a protectorate. I want a system. I'm happy to vote for people who go into office, and I'll even pay their salaries, and I'll authorize them to use force if necessary. But to do what? I want them not to govern me with that force and my taxes. I don't want them to use my money and the authority I give them to use guns. I don't want them using them against me. I want them to use that authority to defend me against criminals, to defend my life, liberty, and property. That's the purpose of the state. So I don't want a government. I want a protectorate. So I got off the track there, but it ties in because the monetary system is widely believed by most people to be the beneficial product of those wise politicians that we elected and the bureaucrats that are employed by the various levels of government. And we think that because we somehow cast our vote every 2 or 4 years, that magically transforms this whole system into a very beneficial structure, and that we can trust it. And that whenever we have a problem, we can go to the government, and those good people will certainly take care of us. Now, just the way, if you think it through, you know that this is totally absurd, and yet people carry that attitude with them day and night, because that was implanted in our heads when we went through the school system, most of us. How does that relate to the Federal Reserve? It relates directly, because people have to understand that the Federal Reserve System is a cartel. It's a partnership, actually, between the government, the elected representatives who passed the law, who made it legal. They took a private cartel, a banking cartel, that was trying to improve their own profit margins, to protect them themselves against competition, to squeeze out the most they could from the public, to control the rules and regulations, to make sure that there are no real rules and regulations that will inconvenience them in any way. They want to run their own show and make it look like it's being done by the people. And that's what happened when the Federal Reserve System was created. And that's what happens in every country when central banks are created. They go into partnerships. The banking cartels form, and then they go into partnership with the governments. So we got two very questionable groups of people. Pretty hard to tell one from the other sometimes. Their ethics are very questionable. In fact, there's a lot of rotating doors, a lot of ins and outs. People work for the government. They'll be working as the Secretary of the Treasury, for example. Well, what was his last job? Oh, Goldman Sachs president, by the way. So that makes a lot of sense. It takes somebody from the cartel, one of the most powerful people in the banking cartel, and now he takes a leave of absence, gets a nice big bonus check and a nice annual retainer. Now he goes to work for the government, and he heads up the agency that controls the banking system. Now, how cozy is that? This is the way it works, ladies and gentlemen. That's what all of the central banks are. I'm trying to get to the point finally that they are a partnership between two groups of people that I consider to be, in today's world at least, the criminal class. We have the banksters on the one side. They have no interest in integrity, honesty. Their ethics are terrible. We see all these fines coming down all the time. Oh, well, the president of this bank and that bank consortium, well, they lied to the people and they manipulated interest rates, not for the people, I can assure you, but to preserve their profit margins. And they negotiated with their political buddies to pass laws to protect them against criminalization. The banks pay $1 million or $5 million fine. Oh boy, that took care of the banks, didn't it? Those bad banks just had to pay a $5 million fine for their criminal activity. You got to be kidding. The banks, what does that mean? A bank. Did you ever see a bank dig into its pocket and pay something? No, banks, those are institutions. They're made up of people. The people didn't pay. The managers that committed those crimes, that designed the crimes, that benefited from them, that got the big bonus checks because of the ripoff to the public, they didn't pay a dime. They got promoted. They got more bonuses. The banks, meaning the stockholders. And even they didn't do too badly, because the criminal activity of the bank, for which they are now paying the fine, was so profitable that the profits exceeded the fine by usually a ratio of 100 to 1. So the fine of $5 million actually produced, let's say, pulling this figure out of thin air, $500 million in profit. So it's a very small cost of doing business, these fines. And the people who perpetuate these crimes never pay a dime. They benefit from them. They never go to jail. That's what's behind the phrase, too big to fail, too big to jail. And so that's because the criminal group in the banking industry have become partners with the criminal group in the government industry. And the two are really inseparable. They work pretty much the same. They move back and forth, a revolving door sort of thing. So you've got a system in the world today that is totally different from what most people think it really is. It was a big shocker to me to discover some of these things that I'm talking about. And I'm still discovering things that make me scratch my head and think, how come I didn't see that before? So, all right, it's taken a long time to answer the question with just the simple fact is that the Federal Reserve System and all of the central banks around the world, including Canada, are cartels, banking cartels, that have been given monopolistic powers by their buddies in the legislature. The governments have created the laws that give the banks the legal authority to do things that if you and I were to do, we would go directly to jail and they'd lose the key, that's for sure. But they do it because they have very powerful partners in government. Now, what is the crime? Well, the crime is that they control the monetary system. Your question earlier at the very beginning was, well, how does that affect us? Well, ladies and gentlemen, just think about it. Money is, by definition, a medium of exchange. That means all of our economic transactions, all of them, well, let's say 99.9% of them involve a medium of exchange, an exchange of money. The only exceptions would be barter. If I want to, barter my watch for your radio or something, you give me the radio, I'll give you the watch. There's no medium of exchange. It's just a direct exchange. But that represents such a small component of the total economic transactions in the world. If we were still living at that level, there'd be not much advance in the world. We'd probably still be living in caves. But anyway, that's not the way it is. We exchange. We have a medium of exchange. So I give you somebody a watch, he gives me the money, and then I give the money to somebody with a radio, and that's how it works. That money, therefore, becomes the vulnerable point. If somebody could control the quantity of that money and who gets it and how easy it is to get, whether you have to work for it or just sign a piece of paper with no labor for it, whether the money is backed by something of intrinsic value, which means labor was spent to create that value, or whether it's created by political process, where a group of people simply say, yes, I approve of that debt, and the money is created out of thin air, which is the way the system now works. Two entirely different mechanisms. And if you have the one mechanism where money is based on value, intrinsic value, because it had to be manufactured or created by artistic skills or something, it took human effort to create, that limits the supply of money tremendously. Now, if you're a banker, you don't like to have a limit on the supply of money because money is your inventory. The money doesn't, if you're a banker and you got a vault full of money, it doesn't do you a bit of good. You don't make any money as a banker with a vault full of money. If you want to make more money, what you do is you take that money out and loan it to people and collect interest on the money. Then you get it back, and it's bigger than it was when you loaned it out. That's what banking is supposed to be all about. So you want an inventory that you have plenty of money to loan out. And if people don't want to borrow it, if the economy is going down, they're not coming in and borrowing your money at the bank, therefore you're not making as much profit. Well, it's simple. You just lower the interest rates. You don't have to charge a lot of interest on a loan if it doesn't cost you anything to make the loan. If the money is made out of nothing, it doesn't take an awful lot of interest to show a profit. And that's the difference. And that's why the banks hate money that is based on gold or silver, because the inventory is limited. They can't just create gold and silver by signing a piece of paper. They have to go out, get a pick, and they have to dig it out of the ground and process it and refine it and so forth. Okay, so where am I going with that? So if you have the ability to expand or contract the money supply artificially, in other words, if you can literally create it out of political resolve or ideology, if you can just imagine it into being, and then you have the power of government to force everybody to accept this thing you created. They call those legal tender laws. You and I could create money all day long, and people would laugh at us. And we don't want to use your money. But if we happen to be the king, we can say, oh yeah, but you got to accept our money or off with your head. Oh, now that's a whole different thing. That's what legal tender laws are all about. So the governments create this funny money. It's worthless in most cases. Didn't used to be, but it is today. And people like us who say, well, I don't want to use that money. I want to use gold or silver, or I want to use a paper currency from some other country, or what have you. Politicians don't like that. The bankers don't like that, because that means you're not using their easy money. So they always have to pass a law, a legal tender law, that says, no, you got to use this money. This is legal, and if you don't use it, you're a criminal. You go to prison, not them. So that means that all of our economic transactions, everything we do, all day long, every day, all of our lives, every time it changes hands, especially in the system we have now, there's a little bite that's taken off of it. There's two little bites, actually. There's a bite of taxation now. They call it the income tax or the profit tax. So anytime they can figure out there was some kind of a gain, whether or not it's not, I mean, both sides are supposed to gain when they make a swap. If I swap my watch for a radio, am I supposed to be taxed on that? Who gained? Well, we both gained, or we wouldn't have done it. But the minute we use money to effect that swap, now the government says, you see, you made a transaction, you had income, and so they're going to charge you a tax on your income, so they get this little bite on that exchange. So the government does well. Now the banks come in and they say, you've used our money, and the latest cry now is to get rid of cashless society, so you have to use checkbook money or credit card money. That means it all goes through the bank, and every time there's a transaction in the bank, of course, there's another little bite that comes off. It's called an interest rate or a service charge or something like that. So the whole idea, you see, for this cartel and their criminal card and their buddies is to get their fingers into every economic transaction of our lives. And every time we buy or sell, they want a little piece of it. And that's what it's all about, ladies and gentlemen. And the process just grows and grows and grows. The piece gets bigger and bigger and bigger. They're never satisfied with it. And they never will be satisfied with what they have until they've got it all. They're like, what's the word? It's when something grows and it destroys something else. It's I can't think of the word right now, but you know what I'm talking about.
Parasite.
Parasite, of course. And look at this place where I am now. We see these beautiful oak trees, and every once in a while some Spanish moss will get into one of them. And each year you can just see that Spanish moss gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the trees are struggling to satisfy the growth needs of the Spanish moss. Moss gets bigger, the tree gets older and withier, and green is not so green, and the leaves drop off early. First thing you know, it's dead. And then the parasite can't feed anymore, so even the parasite dies. But even so what? Parasite doesn't care. It had a good ride. And so we see this parasite called the banking cartel. In my case, it's the Federal Reserve System. It's a parasite, just like that. It's sapping the strength out of the economy, out of everybody's income stream. And it wants more and more and more until finally the host of the parasite has no more energy to give, and it dies. And at that point, of course, the whole corrupt system dies with it. And that's sort of another way of looking at the cycles of civilization. That's what's happened many, many times in history before. And we are right now in the middle of this going on in our lives today. Can we stop it? I think theoretically we can, but we're not going to do it unless people understand it. People have to understand what's going on. And then there are so many people who are now either in the parasitic class themselves. They are the parasites. Even though they say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was a parasite. I thought I was doing good, but I'm a parasite. Well, so I'm a parasite. I am a parasite now, so what do you expect me to do? I can't not be a parasite. So people are in the system now, and they don't want to leave it. They don't want to give up what they consider to be benefits, even though they know it's destroying the system that sustains everybody. They're not going to give up their so-called benefits. The people who make a profit out of this system are not going to give it up. And then there are a lot of people that don't care. They say, oh, well, that doesn't make any difference. I don't understand it. It's somebody's always going to be doing a scam like this, and they don't get it. And then there are people like us. We're fighting like crazy. We're trying to explain it to others. And, fighting the conspiracy is not a growth business. There are very few people that can actually do this. like a full time. It's just, well, I got 20 minutes before dinner. Yes, dear, I'll be right in. Yeah, I'll be there. Oh, I know. I have to fix the toilet. Yeah, I know the kids got to be driven to school. We got our lives to live. And we're supposed to, take an interest in what's going on in the world and become politically active, and become socially active, and go into power centers and turn it all around. Yes, it can be done, but believe me, it's going to be a real tough road. I think it's worth it. Just to change the topic a little bit there, all of this is sort of the theme that we'll be talking about at the Red Pill Expo coming up in June.
Actually, sir, that's exactly what I wanted you to go into a bit. As we kind of close things off, as we're running out of time, that is one of the major solutions, is the Red Pill Expo. Can you go into what the Red Pill Expo is and what you hope to get out of it?
Well, sure. I'll try not to make this as long as I did the first part there. It doesn't take long to say this one. I think most people understand the analogy or the meme, I should say, of the red pill. Take the red pill, and it goes back to the sci-fi movie called The Matrix. I guess it's about 20 years old now. And in the story, the human race is in bad shape. People are living in a grand illusion. They're part of a matrix. They're kind of wired up to a machine. They don't realize that they're not really living the lives that they think they are. They don't realize it's all in their minds, that they're really just wired up and they're providing energy or something like that. And somebody breaks out of the matrix and he says, hey, I've been living in an illusion and I want to save all my fellow human beings. So they can see the difference between this illusion. They think they're going to work. They think they've got a job. They think they've got children. They think they're on vacation. None of that's true. They're slaves to this thing that controls them, and he wants to wake up everybody so they can break out of the matrix. Well, of course, that's the beginning of the story, because then the matrix itself says, no, this is not good. And so the whole system goes against the hero of the story and the few friends he has who are struggling against the matrix, and that's where the drama comes in. Well, if you take the red pill, you'll be able to see reality. It may not be pleasant, but it's real. But if you don't like reality, you can take the blue pill and it puts you right back into the illusion, and you're just as comfortable as you can be, but you're still a slave. So that's the analogy from the story. So we thought we would use it because it does apply in so many cases. Almost everywhere you look, we were talking about just one of them earlier, than the banking system. You find out that there's a huge chasm between the illusion of what we think life is like and the reality once we really dig into it. And this exists in many areas. Money and banking and healthcare, for example, is a huge area where we think we live in this illusion of healthcare, when in reality, and I'm not going to go into that, but it's not at all what we think. Pharmaceutical industry, like the banking industry, is a cartel, and it's not interested in curing people of diseases. It's interested in maintaining them on medication in the treatment of diseases, but not to cure them, because if they cure them, then the money stream dries up. Of course, think about it. So everywhere you look, you see that there's this difference between what we thought life is like and what it really is. And so we've invited everybody who has taken a red pill in some aspect of their lives that affect them deeply. And they're talking about it, and they've either written books about it, or they produced video documentaries, or whatever it is. There are a lot of outspoken people in different things, and most of them are controversial because they're going against the matrix, right? And I suppose people think I am controversial. They call me a conspiracy theorist because I don't like the Federal Reserve. So, yeah, these people are coming together at the Red Pill Expo. And we're not trying to judge, well, you can't say that because we know that you're wrong. That's not the way life really is. We have to open up our minds, and we're giving people a chance to tell us what they have discovered. It doesn't mean we have to agree with them. In some cases, I'm sure that we won't. But many of the positions that I hold today, and I'm very strong about, like the Federal Reserve and the healthcare industry, when I first heard about them, I thought it was kooky. I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. Yeah, that can't be true. If it were true, I would know about it, wouldn't I? Because I read the newspapers and I listen to the news at night, and I didn't hear that. So I have to say to myself, whenever I hear an idea that shocks me, I think, well, that's really weird. That's okay, go listen to it. It might be weird. You don't have to accept it, but I think we should go and find out and listen to what these people have to say. So we're bringing a lot of people with red pills, and they're going to be telling us about what they've discovered, and they're going to show us their evidence. And I think it's going to be one blast. And believe me, if you want to really challenge your brain and maybe figure out why some of the things in your life are not going like you think they should, you should seriously consider coming to the Red Pill Expo. And I guess the best way to tell you to do that is go on the internet and look it up. And the place to look it up is redpillexpo.org. It'll tell you all about it. And anything else, I guess, we could go into details, but that's the general idea.
Absolutely, and I just want to give everyone a heads up of some of the speakers that you can see out there, which include, of course, Mr. Griffin, Robert Kiyosaki, Lord Monckton, James Corbett will be speaking over Skype, so will Cynthia McKinney, Mike Adams, Ty Bollinger, Richard Gage. The list goes on and on and on. I mean, it just goes on, and it's an incredible list of speakers. It's really kind of historic proportions of being able to get these incredible individuals together. That'll be June 23rd, 24th in none other than Bozeman, Montana. And I really hope to see some of you here today down there as well. I'm going to be covering it, and I'm going to be loving it because it's not every day you can get together with so many incredibly intelligent people from all sorts of different red pills, from the health to the finance to the political science to, just going down to the details of how we are being enslaved in every little realm. It is a red pill from all angles, and it's a beautiful thing. But I'd like to now open up the floor to some questions. I think we have time for a few questions. So who would like to ask Mr. Griffin a question? Sean?
Yep. Good afternoon. I was wondering if you could go into some specific similarities and also differences between the United States Federal Reserve and our Bank of Canada here.
Sure. I'm really not an expert in any sense of the word on the Canadian central bank, but I do know enough about it to say that one of the primary differences between the Federal Reserve and most other central banks is that the United States, when they created the Federal Reserve back in 1913, had to create the illusion that the legislation that was creating it, the Federal Reserve Act, was a bill that was going to control the banks, and it was going to decentralize the power of the banks, because that was the whole political motive behind even considering this law in the first place. The banks had caused a lot of problems in the economy in the U.S. There was a lot of bank failures. People were aware that it was a concentration of economic power in the hands of just a few huge banking megaliths and their insurance company partners on Wall Street. And there was the hue and cry went up as we've got to break the grip of the money trust. That was the slogan, actually, that drove that whole thing, to break the grip of the money trust. That was the reason for creating the Federal Reserve System. So in that environment, it was necessary to create the illusion. Now we're back to illusion versus reality again. To create the illusion that the Federal Reserve was going to break this up. It was not going to centralize it. Of course, that was not true because the whole purpose was to keep it centralized, but they had to do it in a way so that it appeared to be otherwise. And so they broke it up into all of these different districts. And you've got one in San Francisco and Atlanta and so forth. And you can go to all these cities and oh, well, that's the San Francisco branch or division of the Federal Reserve System. And the idea was that, oh, look, Maud, we got one of them banks here in our own hometown. So it can't be centralized anymore in New York. Well, the truth of the matter is it was, but they built these big mausoleum type structures all around the U.S., and they put Federal Reserve names on them, and they called it a bank, which it wasn't, but you can still see them. It says Federal Reserve Bank, and And so the idea was to create the illusion of decentralization. That is the primary difference, as I see it, between the Federal Reserve and all of the other central banks of the world. In most countries, and I think it's true in Canada, there's no such, there was, at least in the beginning, there was no such desire to diffuse or decentralize the central bank. So they didn't mess with all of that illusion of having districts. But as far as I can tell, the function and the daily operations of the Canadian the central bank, I should say, are very, very close, if not identical. The whole purpose, remember, is to create the rules and regulations of the banking industry, and to do it in such a way so that it's favorable to the banks themselves, and do it also in a way so that it appears that it's being done by the government. Once you get that clear, you realize that it's a private group wearing the mask of public service, and that the whole purpose is to protect the interests of the banks. That's about 3 out of 3 things that you need to know.
Absolutely, and I think it's so important to talk about just centralization of currency. Of course, when we have fiat currency, it always reverts to its intrinsic value of 0. It always has, always will. And we're almost at the 1000th year anniversary of fiat currency, going back to 1024 AD in China. That goes to show how many times this can repeat itself without people learning. And that's why it's so important to learn about this kind of stuff. But I'll open the floor to another question. Anybody? Randy.
Hello, Mr. Griffin.
Hello.
My name is Randy Penner. You're most well known, of course, for the Creature of Jekyll Island and your work on the Federal Reserve and exposing the realities. But you've also written a very stellar book exposing the medical cartel in terms of cancer. Do you mind taking just a couple of minutes to kind of give us a bit of an overview of that? Thank you.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. It's one of my favorite topics also. And it's almost a direct parallel to the banking story, in that the difference between what we think is real and the real is so different. Another common element to that story is that when I started down the path of discovery, I came from that illusion. I thought that the medical profession was at the pinnacle of high ethics, and that everybody that was in the field was there primarily just because they wanted to cure disease, they wanted to extend the lifespan and the vitality of human beings, and they wanted to make the world a better place, a more healthy place, and that everybody was dedicated to that goal, and they was selfless. And everywhere you look, you get that image, you sort of presented to you in movies and in books, and even when you walk into the hospitals and doctors' offices, everything you see with the diplomas on the wall and the wood paneling and all the expensive equipment, you think, well, this is very good. But then, okay, what I found out, a little backstory on that. Back in the 60s and 70s, one of my good friends I developed a strong friendship with him was Dr. John Richardson, who was an MD, a very highly respected general practitioner. Well, he specialized in eye, ear, nose, and throat too, I think, in the San Francisco area. And he asked me to give him some help, if I would, to explain to the world about a new medical treatment that he was using in the control of cancer. It was called Laetrile. You probably have heard about it, very controversial substance. And I might add that I'm glad to say that the reason you might have heard about it was due partly to my book called World Without Cancer, the story of vitamin B17. I told Dr. John that I'd be glad to help him write an article because they were after him to stop using it, even though he was having a great deal of success with it. They told him to stop using it because it was not approved by the FDA. And therefore, by definition, it was quackery. If it's not approved, it doesn't make a difference whether it works or not. If it's not approved, it's quackery, or what they call an unapproved treatment of cancer therapy. And they were threatening to take his medical license, which eventually they did, by the way. And why? Because he was using a non-approved cancer treatment to save lives. So that's how I got into it. I thought, well, this would be easy. I'll just listen to what John tells me and I'll memorize it and I'll rewrite it and make it easy to understand, and I'll be done with it in about 3 or 4 weeks. Well, little did I know how much voltage, how high the voltage was in that wire I was about to grab hold of, because I had no idea that there was a difference between the science of cancer therapy and the politics of cancer therapy, or more specifically, the economics of cancer therapy. And what I discovered is that the medical profession was taken over many years ago. In fact, about the same time that the Federal Reserve came into being, and pretty much by the same people, I might add. The Rockefellers and the Carnegies got together and they began to fund the medical schools of the United States to improve the quality of medical education. It was all done under the leadership of Dr. Abraham Flexner. He wrote the famous Flexner Report. I think it was 1910 or thereabouts. And the idea was that, well, medical education was in bad shape in America. You could get to be a doctor simply by sending in your money, and you get your diploma in the mail. And there were a lot of real quacks out there pretending that they had scientific knowledge, and they didn't. And so they wanted to fix all that. It was a very admirable move. I mean, the thing is, what people didn't realize is that Rockefeller and Carnegie were very deeply involved in the pharmaceutical industry. And so when they began to put money into these medical schools, there was a quid pro quo for it. The schools got the money, and in return, the schools had to agree to accept several people from the Carnegie and Rockefeller group, investment group, on their boards of directors. And those people had the mission to determine and change the curricula of these universities, these medical schools, to completely eliminate anything like homeopathy or anything that would come from nature. And it was all skewed now from that point forward. You couldn't graduate as a doctor unless you were a pretty well-trained drug salesman. Your whole purpose of your education was to learn everything there was about chemistry, about complex drugs, drug reactions, drug cures, and everything. So that from that point forward, the whole medical profession in America got skewed. And even though all of these doctors were, most of them by far were, very smart, intelligent people, and with high motives, I might add. Sure, they knew that they were going to make a lot of money as a doctor, but they still wanted to make a lot of money doing good. They wanted to save lives. But once they got into the system, that part was all skewed around, because they came out the other end to the point where no matter what you go to your doctor for today, I don't care whether it's a hangnail, you'll probably walk out the door with a drug prescription, because that's what the doctors have been trained to do. And that is a fact, and everybody can see that, and when you think about it, you recognize it. But now to think that that applies to something as important as cancer is a mind blower, but it does. And I'll cut to the chase. What I discovered was that all of the natural treatments for cancer, including the one I was writing about, which is Laetrile, or properly known as amygdalin, which comes from nature. You can pick it from trees, the seeds and things. It's basically free, highly effective control for cancer, a natural control for cancer. But the pharmaceutical industry wages war against anything like that, because you cannot patent something that comes from nature. And so since they now control what is acceptable as a medical treatment, all of the things that come from nature are considered to be non-proven cancer therapies. And if you try and use them, you go to jail because they're non-proven. And therefore, they call them quackery if they're not proven. They think that's the same thing. And so I discovered that the really effective treatments for cancer are basically free, or so close to it. And you cannot use them without violating the law. And that's one of the reasons Dr. Richardson actually lost his license, is because he technically was violating the law. And they called him a quack because he was saving lives with an unproven cancer treatment. That's what I discovered. That's the short version of what I discovered, and this was no accident. Now, I have to say that doesn't mean that the average doctor out there knows or would agree with what I'm saying. he says, no, I've read my medical journals, and they say that this stuff called Laetrile and all these homeopathy things and these herbs and things that's all nonsense. It's just old wives' tale. Now, you really got to get the good stuff from the pharmaceutical companies if you really want to get down to business. And they believe it because they spent, 7, 8 years studying it. And, of course, they believe it. They think it's true. So that's the short version. It's another one of those red pills that I think people need to take, especially when you consider that today, in your lifetime, most people listening to this presentation, in their lifetime, 1 out of every 3 is going to contract cancer. So this is really an epidemic of historic proportions. And if you don't think it doesn't affect you, just wait until that number catches up with you.
Absolutely. Really well said, Mr. Griffin. I think we saw a question over there. Darren?
Yes.
Mind coming up to the podium?
Well, Mr. Griffin, nice to talk to you. My question is, what are your thoughts on digital currency and how that's being introduced into the world and as a way to maybe decentralize the monetary system? And how do you view the government intervening in that? Or what are your thoughts on that whole process, what is happening currently?
Yeah, that's a very important one. I think we're going to have somebody at the Red Pill talking on that, by the way. But I'm not an expert on it, but I've tried to read everything that comes across my desk. And here's my take on it right now. First of all, I like the digital cryptocurrencies a lot because they focus on this thing called inflation. One of the reasons they like digital currencies, especially things like Bitcoin, where the algorithm is such that there's only so many that can be created, is because that means that the money supply is limited, which means that you just can't create it and keep creating it and devaluing its purchasing power because you're flooding the world with it. So what's one of the talking points for things like Bitcoin. And that helps people focus on one of the major weaknesses of the present fiat system is that all fiat monies are losing value. It's just a question of time till they go from something to nothing. So I like it for that reason. And there's, of course, another issue of privacy involved there. The chain block technology is such that it's, I guess, almost impossible to identify the individuals making the transactions. Now, I think that's very valuable, not because I am a drug dealer or because I have something to hide. It's because I like my privacy. I don't want everybody knowing what I'm doing and how much money I might have or who I'm giving it to or anything like that. It's nobody's business but mine. So I think the idea of privacy is very, very important. Everybody that's interested in this topic has pretty much read about the issues I just mentioned. So it's all plus on that side of it. But there is one weakness I think I should mention, and that is that if you look at the list of things or qualities that make money ideal, their fungibility, they don't perish, and so forth, all of the things that gold and silver have, there's one of those qualities is that they have intrinsic value. So that even if nobody wants your money to use it as a medium of exchange, they still would want it because it has value in itself, not as money. For example, in the beginning when money was first being developed as a concept, the most common money was wheat and grain. And then it was cattle. And it was stuff you could eat. So if you didn't, if you didn't want to exchange it, at least you could eat it. So and that's why it became valuable to have gold and silver because, well, if you didn't want it as a pretty coin or to exchange it, hey, you could melt it down and make jewelry out of it. Or if you had an iron ingot, you could melt it down and make a sword out of it or a shield out of it. And in those primitive days, weapons of war were perhaps the most important thing you could have to defend yourself and your family. So intrinsic value is an extremely important thing for a good money. And that's one thing that the cryptocurrencies and the digital currencies do not have. Some people have called it vaporware because if the internet goes down, what do you got? Well, you've got a dead computer and that's it. It's gone. And you just hope that the internet comes back up and that the system will work again when it comes back up. So I'm not saying that that is any reason not to become involved in cryptocurrencies, because I think there are a lot of good reasons for it. But I just think people should be aware that it is a potential problem. Now, some people are trying to resolve that problem. And I know that they want to back cryptocurrency with something of tangible value. It's a hard task, because if you're going to back cryptocurrency with something of intrinsic value, then the cryptocurrency becomes just another rendition of it. Just like, for example, paper money is good only because it's backed by gold or silver. And so it's really the gold or the silver that is the money, and the paper becomes the representation of that money. So in order to make a cryptocurrency work in that fashion, then the cryptocurrency would have to be just like a receipt rather than the essence itself. I think it could be done. I hope it can be done, because I think it would be fun and interesting and very useful to see other things come into play as money. Maybe rare earth metals could come into play as money. Things like that, where a little tiny quantity would be very, very valuable, and so somebody would have to be able to digitize it and issue hundredths or thousands of a part of that. And meanwhile, the whole part is being vaulted somewhere. Those are all interesting challenges, and I think it can be done. And all in all, I'm a big fan of cryptocurrencies.
Absolutely. And I really enjoy your outlook on this subject, because, of course, one of the biggest problems with fiat currency is that it's centralized. And I think a lot of people are quite concerned, and rightly so, about the notion of them trying to hijack cryptocurrency and centralize it. One of the great things about cryptocurrency is that it's decentralized, and that kind of plays into what you were talking about before, Mr. Griffin, about a cashless society, as they are trying to create digital currencies that only run through the banks. So I'll put it this way: if your money's in the bank, it's not yours, it's the bank's. And if your money's always being transacted through the banks without any physical money in your hand, that means your money is always owned by the banks, which is a huge, huge problem that a lot of people see. So people definitely have to see the difference between what cryptocurrency is as it's decentralized, as a great insurance, maybe not forever, but a great insurance all the same, and then at the same time look at centralized cashless society kind of scenario, which could seriously hurt us. And as you've mentioned in a past interview with me, Mr. Griffin, it kind of is the globalist endgame to try and create a cashless society, because they're at this moment trying to incorporate it into the SDR, the special drawing rights, or as some would call it, the world currency over at the IMF.
Absolutely, yeah. Cashless society is the ultimate fiat money. It's the ultimate. I mean, digital money by itself is the ultimate fiat money. So, yeah, that's what they want. And it's interesting to see all the big banks spending a lot of money to develop their own version of Bitcoin. But their own version of Bitcoin will not be cryptocurrency. Crypto meaning hidden, unbreakable, or secret, in the crypt, so to speak. No, what they'll come up with will be just a digitized version of the present monetary system, and they'll call it digital cryptocurrency just to fool people.
Absolutely. I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone have a question to ask Mr. Griffin? Yeah, come on up. Yeah. What's your name?
Brad Krass.
Brad Krass, okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Griffin. It's such a pleasure to speak with you, because several summers ago I read your book, Creature from Jekyll Island, and as a summer read, and I must say, for 4 days afterwards, I was quite depressed. Thank you for that. My question is, did we ever discover who the original 12 shareholders of the Federal Reserve were when it was incorporated?
I'm not sure about that. I've seen papers written that say that they have the evidence of them. I have never seen the evidence myself. The closest I've ever come to it was a New York Times article that appeared shortly after the Fed was created in 1913. And if you can believe it, it was right there in the newspaper. It listed the shareholders. And some of them were people I never heard of. They're not great historic figures. That's the last I've ever heard of these people. Some of them, most of them were in the financial industry. I know Rothschild was not on the list and so forth. But I had the feeling that I still have this feeling that there's a part of the history that is not released. And I have a feeling that the original stockholders might have been placeholders for setting up the corporation, and they put in probably small amounts of money, and that later on, in confidential circumstances, those stocks were reissued. Now, having said that, though, come to the question of, well, so what? The implication behind that is that, well, if we could just figure out who the stockholders are, we will at last come to the understanding of who is behind it. And I don't think that is true. Who is behind it? It's like a cartel, for example. Who is behind it are the big players in the cartel. If you had a cartel of Mexico and Venezuela and the U.S., let's say, all an oil cartel, probably the one with the most economic clout, or the most oil, but certainly the most economic clout, and that includes military clout, would be the dominant partner in the cartel, regardless of the stock. The stock issued does not represent ownership in the Federal Reserve. That's an important thing to remember. Like all other corporations, stock is ownership. You have a piece of this corporation and you own it. You own it, period. Well, if you own it, then you can sell it or you can give it away. Now, the stockholders in the present concept are the member banks, and they are not allowed to sell their stock. So they don't own it. They don't even vote for the members on the board, the Federal Reserve Board. They don't have voting privileges either. So this stock ownership is a myth. It's simply it's a means of putting a little bit of money into the kitty in the beginning, so they could say, okay, we're capitalized. We've got something to start with. And also to make it look like it was a real corporation of some kind, but it doesn't have any of those earmarks. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because when this issue is mentioned of who owns the Federal Reserve System, the focus is on, well, all we have to do now is take the Federal Reserve away from those bad people and turn it over to those trustworthy politicians and turn it over to the treasury. We'll show them. We'll just give it back to the people who will control it again through their politicians. And of course, that's part of the illusion. I don't care whether the Federal Reserve is technically or as a corporate structure is part of the treasury or whether it's a private corporation and they got stockholders all around the world. I don't care about that, because as long as it has the authority to create money out of nothing, that's what it's going to do, and it will be dominated by this partnership of politicians and bankers. I don't care what structure you give it, that's the form and function it will have. So most people that get onto this tax say, well, let's turn the Fed over to the Treasury and that'll solve our problems. No, it won't.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Griffin. It's been incredible hearing your insight as always. And I really hope that people check out theredpillexpo.org. Check out, if you haven't already, you've got to read The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's one of the most stunning reads you'll ever partake in, because, I mean, it just changed my whole world. It's changed most people's worlds who've actually read it. And it just makes you think twice about everything you've ever been told about money. So-called quote-unquote money. Of course, money has to have a store of value, so this piece of paper in your hand isn't exactly money. It's a promissory note that's never promised. It's never actually given back. You can't exchange it. It's a terrible thing, and I mean, I often equate it to the idea of being shoved down a hole of debt, and you fall down this bottomless pit of debt, and you end up you're forced to ask for a helping hand from the government and the banking system to get back up. That's servitude, that's slavery, that is absolute subservience, and exactly the kind of end goal they want. They want us to be enslaved by this debt. They want us to be able to be unable to take care of our families, so we depend on them. It's a massive control complex, and of course there's much more to it. That's for another day, of course, but I'm so happy to hear from Mr. Griffin, because he has been looking into this for so long and has put together such incredible information. So I want to thank you, Mr. Griffin, once again, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Well, thank you for having me.